focus to our top story now. January has seen a series of the deadliest attacks by the Taliban-ISIS combine in Afghanistan. One on a hotel and the other on a crowded street in downtown Kabul. More than 130 persons, including 4 Americans and 10 other foreigners, have been killed, hundreds seriously injured. Is Afghanistan on the verge of yet another war with many sides and no victors? WION senior foreign editor Padma Rao reports.
There is an unprecedented build-up in the wintry skies of the Afghan capital, Kabul. It's just 1,000 flight kilometers northwest from New Delhi. There are war clouds, grey and rumbling louder than in decades. Afghanistan is on the verge of a deadly relapse and a return to chaos and multilateral war. And this time it will be one that will pressure regional players India and Pakistan. One as an adversary and the other as an ally of the United States of America under President Donald Trump. The Afghan Taliban and the Islamic State control 40% of Afghanistan. Kabul's weak and corruption-charged government controls only about 60%. But the Islamist Taliban strangleholds have been growing in direct proportion to the decrease in Afghan President Ashraf Ghani's popularity. And joining hands with the Taliban has been none other than the Middle East's Islamic State. Still, Kabul is a heavily guarded capital. So how could Islamist terrorists strike high-profile installations like the Intercontinental Hotel or the busy shopping centre Chicken Street so openly and so boldly? A little help from powerful friends always comes in handy. And if such friends manufacture explosives of the kind that were found after the attack on the hotel, all the better. Pakistan has for long been stoking a proxy war in Afghanistan. Consequently, and even though the Afghan Taliban and the Islamic State claimed credit for the recent attacks, an Afghan government spokesman blamed them on the quote-unquote Pakistan-based Haqqani terrorist network. The United States too laid the blame squarely at Pakistan's door. We call on Pakistan to prevent the Taliban from using its soil, unquote. This was White House spokesperson Sarah Sanders. Stuck in the quagmire that is Afghanistan, the US has for long tried to pressure India to step in with more than mere logistical support to Afghan security forces. This is chiefly to enable the American boys and girls to depart. But wisely, New Delhi has said no to putting its own boots on Afghan ground. That the United States and its allies will retaliate is certain. But this time, the US will, in all likelihood, train its viewfinders both on the Pakistan-based Haqqani network and also just past its shoulders upon Pakistan itself. There will be an expected knee-jerk reaction from Islamabad on its other borders to India. That's Islamabad's tried and tested tactic of trying to divert world attention from the filth in its own backyard. But New Delhi is not worried. For this time, there is an unpredictably predictable president in the White House, and he has already indicated that as far as Pakistan's true colours are concerned, he means business. Padma Rao, WION.
Now, call it ingenuity or twisted genius. Terror groups in Afghanistan have used different vehicles when it comes to suicide bombings in civilian areas. Now, the idea is that the explosives packed in a vehicle should blend with other vehicles on the street and get as close as possible to the intended target without drawing the attention of police and other security agencies. In the Kabul attack over the weekend now, let's take a look at what happened. It was an ambulance that was used. The vehicle, remember, is a common sight in Kabul. But in October of 2017, the Taliban ended up using captured military Humvees loaded with TNT to storm an Afghan army base, killing 43. In August 2017, the Taliban once again used a pickup truck for a suicide attack on a NATO convoy near Kandahar. In May of the same year, it was a sewage truck that detonated in Kabul's Tony diplomatic quarter, killing 90 and injuring 461. The Haqqani network was blamed for that attack. Now, these attacks have underscored the point that cities and towns have been especially targeted as the Taliban gains strength in the countryside. A look now at this map tells you how wide the Taliban spread is, really speaking. The map's coming up, as you can see, across a large chunk of southern Afghanistan in the opium-growing provinces of Kandahar, Helmand and Nimroz. It is the Taliban that controls vast sections of the countryside. They're also dominant in parts of adjoining Faryab province. In fact, they are uncontested in at least 2 western provinces of Faryab as well as Baghdis. and they also hold pockets in other provinces in the east as well as the north. Let's take a look now at the Taliban's hold in rural areas of the country. According to an assessment of the respected Long War Journal, the Taliban controls 41 districts in these areas. Also, it's contesting government control in 117 other districts. The Taliban's control over rural areas is a strategic advantage. It's quite clear that the Afghan government and the US cannot push the Taliban back without looking at the countryside. So the facts are in front of you. We've taken a look at those maps. Let's talk to our guests now to figure out what's going on in Afghanistan. Joining me this evening is Shahida Mohammad Abdali, the Afghan ambassador to India from New Delhi. G. Pathar Sati, former Indian diplomat, joining us once again from New Delhi. Michael Kugelman of the Asia program joins us from Washington, D.C. And noted journalist Rahimullah Yousafzai is joining us from Peshawar. Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you all for being with us here on the broadcast. Ambassador Abdali, can I ask you first, though, what exactly was the messaging behind these last couple of attacks, especially in Kabul?
Well, this is very tragic that we've been facing wave of terrorist attacks in the last few days in Afghanistan. But certainly the terrorists will do everything they can to cause casualties as they do. But we have to question as to why suddenly the spike in activities and terrorist activities in Afghanistan. And I believe the global call to end the use of terrorism is responded by rather, a more intensified use of terrorism against the common people, against the innocent Afghans, and the international community. As you have seen in the last few days, it is not only the Afghans who are dying. Yes, we do lose many Afghans, but at the same time, if you look at the incidents in the last few days, there was an attack on the Save the Children in Jalalabad, which is an NGO belonged to the US, and then we also lost many Ukrainians and other nationals, including the US, in the Kabul International Continental Hotel. So this is an attack on the international community, not only on the Afghans. So therefore, it is high time that we all together as a global community unite and respond unitedly against the terrorism that is being used against us.
Fair enough, Ambassador. Stay with me a while longer. Michael Kugelman, some are calling this the outcome of the bad blood, at least of late, between Washington and Islamabad. What do you say to that contention?
Well, I think that whenever you have these major, large-scale Taliban attacks in urban spaces in Afghanistan, you think about the sanctuaries in Pakistan, which, of course, are still very much there. But I think the bigger issue here is that we need to consider the timing of these attacks in the context of U.S. efforts to ramp up its fight against the Taliban on the battlefield. I mean, the Trump administration's Afghanistan strategy revolves around applying more pressure on the Taliban on the battlefield in the hopes of eventually getting it to agree to talks. And I think that the Taliban, in staging these recent attacks, these recent horrific mass casualty attacks in urban spaces, is trying to demonstrate the fact that, even if the U.S. plans to come down hard on it, it still is very strong and retains the ability to inflict tremendous amounts of damage in high population areas, including Kabul. So I think that certainly one needs to consider the U.S.-Pakistan tensions in this context, but I think we also need to look at the Trump administration strategy in of itself, because it is a very military-focused strategy, and that it wants to take the fight to the Taliban a lot harder. And the Taliban wants to prove that that's not going to deter it, that's not going to weaken it, and that it still retains the ability to inflict a lot of damage on the country and including on its civilians.
Fair enough. Ambassador Pathar Sati, does that in some ways indicate that Pakistan might be, supporting the Taliban's fight back against, this renewed pressure from the United States, given that it has been facing a lot of pressure from Washington itself?
Look, right now the pressure from Washington, as Mr. Krugman says, is largely military. Military supplies worth to some $500 billion have been cut. That's neither here nor there. China fills the vacuum. The other point is that on the diplomatic side, the U.S. has much more to do. I mean, NATO allies have to be mobilized. Its Western European partners have to be brought into the ground. And most importantly, if you're really going to put the squeeze on Pakistan, one single drone attack in North Waziristan is not going to ruffle anybody's feathers. This will have to be coordinated with the Afghans. They will have to be in partnership, and most important, despite all the Chinese assistance, Pakistan's economy and its foreign exchange reserves survive on American and West European and Western financial institution assistance ranging from the World Bank to the ADB. Now, if America is serious, then it should get into the diplomatic act of mobilizing its allies for this purpose. Because, as I said, it's one drone strike or two drone strikes, no big deal. In fact, Pakistan has threatened to shoot down drones. So the military pressure, has to be sustained with a diplomatic economic effort. Now, one more point I would like to make.
Sure.
And my Afghan friends shouldn't misunderstand this. And I say so as a good friend of Afghanistan. Too much of talk now in Pakistan that the Afghan establishment itself is split. Mm-hmm. That you have Governor Muhammad Atta, you have the Foreign Minister Rabbani, you have Abdullah's deputy Mohakek, Dostam, another warlord, going in another direction. Herat with Ismail Khan has its own priorities. I think external people should not interfere, but encourage the Afghans to get together, putting aside differences at this moment of crisis. I think that is very important. I hope my Afghan friends don't mind it. It's coming from a friend. I was last year in Kabul, living in a hotel near the Iraqi embassy, which got blown up when I was there. This continues, and I really admire the resilience of the Taliban, of the Afghans, to take all this. But as I said,
allow me to come in, Ambassador. I want to take one quick question across to Rahimullah Yousafzai as well. Going off of what the ambassador just said, sir, the internal situation in Afghanistan is shaky. Do you think the Taliban, the ISIS, are taking advantage of this, and this is only helping in some ways people lose even more faith in the establishment?
I think that is the purpose. The spate of attacks which have taken place, killing about 200 people in the last 1 week. And if you take the figures for January, 1,000 killed all over Afghanistan. So I think there has been this increase in the number of attacks. And the purpose is that the Afghan government should look helpless, that the Taliban are saying very loudly that we have an answer to the American strategy, which is military focused. I think to every action there is a reaction. Taliban have suffered heavy losses. There has been an increase, a dramatic increase in the number of airstrikes. And, they are responding. They are trying to tell the Americans that we won't abandon the battlefield. I think that is the real issue right now. Whether there is going to be more fighting or whether there will be some political process which will be initiated. Right now, all the focus is on fighting by both sides, by all sides. And that is actually taking a heavy toll of Afghan people, Afghan civilians. The latest attack was terrible because so many civilians were killed, so many women and children were killed.
Absolutely.
So I think that has to stop.
It definitely has to stop, and as you're saying, that might be the prime agenda over here. Ambassador Abdali, to you next. Are we witnessing a change in strategy to that end in that case? Because the Taliban seems like it's focusing more and more, not just the Taliban, the ISIS as well, more and more on civilian targets this time around.
Well, I think this is especially after the global call, in particular the U.S. new strategy for South Asia and Afghanistan, which calls clearly on those who use terrorism and those who give sanctuaries to terrorists in the soil and use against Afghanistan and others in this region. And this is a reaction, I believe, which means they are now ready to give up on the use of terrorism. Therefore, we hope that the world community will not give up on a clear message and decisive action against the state sponsor of terrorism, which clearly exists in our part of the world, in our neighborhood. And it is not only the Afghans who have suffered because of this, and the whole world community. Therefore, the U.S. South Asia policy needs to be reinforced by action, and we should not be limited to giving statements whenever we see an attack on the innocent people. Therefore, it's high time that the international community, regional countries unite against the use of terrorism that is so clearly there against our people.